Okay, so diving into the material you share these articles, your notes on the Harvard legal fight,
Mm.
it really paints a picture of something pretty significant brewing.
It really does. There's so much noise around this, it's easy to lose track of the core issues.
Exactly. And that's what we want to do today, right?
Yeah.
Cut through that noise. We're talking about this unprecedented legal battle. Harvard University taking on the Trump administration over what, $2.2 billion in frozen federal grants?
That's a staggering amount. And the lawsuit was filed just this Monday, April 21st, 2025, in Boston. It really feels like a major showdown.
It does. A real clash between, this powerhouse academic institution and the federal government. The implications feel huge.
Absolutely massive. Goes way beyond just the money.
So our mission today, really, is to unpack this.
Yeah.
Why the freeze? Why Harvard's defiant reaction? And I guess, what does it all mean for higher education, for research, for everything else?
Let's start with the trigger, right? That letter the administration sent.
Yeah, the one on April 11th wasn't just a friendly note, from what I gather. More like ultimatums.
That's a good way to put it. A list of pretty firm demands. Non-negotiable conditions, basically.
And these are some heavy demands, weren't they? Not just minor tweaks.
Not at all. We're talking a total overhaul of admissions policies,
Okay.
demanding an audit, get this, of the political views of students and faculty.
Wow, seriously.
Yep. Shutting down specific student clubs and boosting cooperation with immigration authorities to screen international students for, quote, anti-American views.
Anti-American views. That sounds incredibly broad. And their justification was?
Officially, rooting out anti-Semitism on campus, they pointed back to the protests against Israel's war in Gaza last year.
Right, I remember that context. But Harvard's president, Alan Garber, he didn't buy that framing, did he?
Not one bit. He sent a letter to the university community basically saying Harvard would not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights. A very clear line in the sand.
And the administration's response to that was immediate.
Almost instantaneous. Hours after Garber's letter went public, boom, the freeze was announced. $2.2 billion in multi-year grants, plus another $60 million in contracts. Gone, just like that.
Just frozen. And that $2.2 billion, we need to remember, that fuels critical research, right? Alzheimer's, cancer, AI.
Hugely important stuff. It's not abstract money. It's the engine for major scientific and medical progress. It supports labs, researchers, everything.
Which, I guess, explains Harvard's next move,
Uh-huh.
filing that massive 51-page lawsuit.
They had to push back their central argument that the funding freeze is legally arbitrary and capricious.
Okay, arbitrary and capricious. Can you break that down a bit? What does that mean in plain English?
It basically means the government's decision lacked a rational basis. Like, it was made on a whim or for political reasons, not based on actual law or evidence related to the grants themselves. There was no logical connection.
Gotcha. And they're basing the lawsuit on specific legal grounds.
Yes, two main pillars. First, a violation of Harvard's First Amendment rights, freedom of speech, academic freedom. That's huge. Second, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. That's the law saying institutions getting federal funds can't discriminate based on race, color, or national origin. Harvard's implying this freeze is discriminatory or wasn't handled properly under Title VI rules.
And they're directly challenging the administration's logic, saying, hey, what does anti-Semitism have to do with our cancer research funding?
Exactly. The lawsuit explicitly states there's no rational connection between anti-Semitism concerns and the medical, scientific, technological, and other research it has frozen. It's like punishing the math department because someone in the history department did something wrong.
That makes sense. So while the money is eye-watering, the real stakes are much higher.
Oh, absolutely. It's about the research itself. That $2.2 billion supports work on Alzheimer's, TB, quantum computing. It flows to places like Dana-Farber, Boston Children's Hospital.
Right. These aren't just Harvard labs. They're major health institutions.
Precisely. And Harvard's lawsuit spells it out. This freeze could have a massive impact on research programs, the people who benefit from that research, and honestly, the national interest in staying innovative.
I even saw a stat somewhere.
Yeah.
Something about NIH funding having a multiplier effect on the economy.
Yeah, a 2024 report found every NIH dollar generates about $2.56 in economic activity. So cutting this off has ripples way beyond the lab bench.
But the administration sees it differently. The White House spokesman, Harrison Fields, talked about ending the gravy train, right? Saying taxpayer funds are a privilege.
That's their narrative, that this is about accountability, that universities can't just expect federal money without meeting certain standards or addressing concerns like anti-Semitism.
So this sets up a fundamental clash. Academic freedom versus government oversight. Now, why Harvard? Why are they seemingly ground zero for this? Is it part of something bigger?
It definitely seems to be. The administration has been pretty open about targeting what they call hotbeds of liberalism and anti-Semitism on campuses.
And Harvard isn't the first one investigated or hit with funding issues recently.
No. Since March 2025, the Department of Education has launched Title VI investigations into, 60 universities. Columbia lost $400 million after protests. Cornell and Northwestern have seen cuts, too.
So there's a pattern,
Yeah.
and it's driven by this joint task force to combat anti-Semitism.
Largely, yes. Their argument is that universities have let anti-Semitism fester, that they haven't cracked down hard enough.
And the demands on Harvard went beyond just admissions and viewpoint audits. What else was in that letter?
Oh, yeah. Eliminate DEI programs, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah.
Ban face masks at protests, screen international students for hostile beliefs, again, very vague, and stop recognizing student clubs that supposedly promote criminal activity.
Which gets back to President Garber's point, right?
Yeah.
That this feels less about anti-Semitism and more about controlling universities, regulating intellectual conditions, as he put it.
That phrase really captures Harvard's fear that this is government overreach trying to dictate the campus climate, not just address specific hate incidents.
Okay, let's circle back to the lawsuit itself. Harvard's strategy seems to heavily rely on procedural arguments, too, about Title VI.
Yes, a key claim is that the administration totally bypassed the legal procedures required under Title VI. Normally, there has to be an investigation, findings, notice, a chance for the university to respond before funds get cut. Harvard says they just skipped all that.
Straight to the freeze, hence the arbitrary and capricious claim again.
Exactly. It ties back to that acting without following the rules, without due process.
And the First Amendment argument is central, too, protecting free speech and academic freedom.
Absolutely crucial. They're leaning heavily on the idea that universities need protection for open debate, even uncomfortable debate. They reference Supreme Court precedent on the unique role of universities.
And the lawsuit language is strong, accusing the administration of using the freeze as part of a, quote, pressure campaign to force Harvard to submit to the government's control over its academic programs.
Doesn't pull any punches. It frames the freeze not as a remedy, but as a weapon to enforce compliance.
And again, hammering that point, anti-Semitism concerns don't justify cutting off unrelated research funding. Your analogy earlier about the chef and the waiter seems pretty apt.
Right. Punishing one part for the alleged sins of another, unrelated part, that's Harvard's core argument on the lack of rational connection.
So Harvard stands firm, files the suit, and the administration's reaction wasn't exactly conciliatory.
Not at all. Remember, the freeze itself came hours after Garber's defiant letter. And then Trump himself posts on Truth Social, musing about stripping Harvard's tax-exempt status.
Yeah, calling it a political entity, that really escalated things.
Big time. And it wasn't just rhetoric. There were actions affecting international students across many universities, too.
The visa revocations, over 500 students and researchers affected across 80 universities.
Exactly. While not solely Harvard-focused, it definitely added to the pressure and uncertainty for international scholars everywhere, including at Harvard.
And then the Wall Street Journal reported another $1 billion in health research grants might be on the chopping block.
Yeah, that report surfaced around April 20th, suggesting this might just be the beginning of wider cuts, more uncertainty.
Yet the White House spokesman, Fields, kept doubling down, saying they'll end unchecked anti-Semitism and ensure tax dollars don't fund dangerous racial discrimination.
Right. They're sticking to their guns, maintaining this is about accountability and stopping hate, even while Harvard points to its ongoing reforms to combat anti-Semitism.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit. Beyond the legal arguments and political statements, what's the human cost? What's the immediate fallout for people on the ground, scientists, students, patients?
It's starting to bite. Harvard Medical School warned about potential staffing cuts, scaling back programs. We saw reports in the Harvard Crimson about this.
So actual jobs and research programs are already threatened.
Yes. There was a specific example mentioned. A prominent tuberculosis researcher at the School of Public Health, Sarah Fortune, apparently got a stop work order on her NIH-funded research.
Wow. Stop.
Yeah. And that $60 million NIH contract we mentioned earlier, that involved multiple universities. That's now in jeopardy, affecting collaborative work.
And the hospitals. Mass General Brigham, places like that.
Their leadership, like CEO Ann Klobansky, acknowledged the huge uncertainty this creates. It casts a shadow over planning, operations, potentially even patient care down the line.
And students must be feeling this too. Financial aid,
Yeah,
research jobs.
absolutely. Fewer funded projects mean fewer research assistant positions. And the overall financial pressure on the university could, eventually impact financial aid budgets. It creates a lot of anxiety.
It sounds like a really tough situation. But Harvard isn't entirely alone in this fight, are they? Other groups are speaking out.
No, they've gotten significant backup. The American Council on Education, ACE, which represents tons of colleges, came out strongly supporting Harvard, criticizing the administration or ignoring due process and the rule of law.
That's a big voice in higher ed.
Huge. And former President Obama tweeted his support, praising Harvard for rejecting what he called an unlawful and ham-handed attempt to stifle academic freedom.
Okay, that's quite the statement. Any other university leaders?
Princeton's president, Christopher Eisgruber, offered public support. And alumni groups, like one mentioned with Anurama Bhargava, praised Harvard for defending higher education's integrity.
What about faculty groups? The AAUP.
The American Association of University Professors actually filed its own lawsuit around the same time, April 14th, challenging the administration's broader actions. And the AAUP's Harvard chapter condemned the funding freeze in really strong terms.
So there's a real rallying effect happening.
Definitely seems like it. A sense that this isn't just about Harvard, but about fundamental principles affecting everyone in academia.
Which brings us to that bigger picture, doesn't it? This whole battle seems to be a trial for academic freedom itself. Who gets to control what happens at universities?
That's the core question. Historically, universities are supposed to be places for free thought, for challenging ideas. If the government can use funding as a lever to control policies, speech, research agendas, that changes everything.
And Harvard is framing their lawsuit exactly that way, defending the values that made American higher ed a global leader.
Yes, they're arguing that protecting this autonomy is vital for continued innovation. Think about it. Government-funded research at places like Harvard gave us vaccines, AI breakthroughs.
Right, it's tied to national progress, which raises that uncomfortable question.
Is cutting off research funding to settle political scores actually harming the country in the long run?
Yeah, it feels like a really critical point to consider. So where do things stand right now? What's the immediate next step we're watching for?
The very next thing is the federal judge in Boston deciding on Harvard's request for a temporary restraining order, or TRO. That would pause the freeze while the main case plays out.
But getting a final resolution,
Yeah.
that could take a while.
Oh, almost certainly. Both sides have deep pockets and top lawyers. The issues are complex: First Amendment, Title VI, administrative law. This could be tied up in court for a long time.
And the administration isn't showing signs of easing up. Threats of more cuts, the tax-exempt status challenge still lingering.
They seem committed to their course. The pressure remains high.
But Harvard has some advantages. Past legal wins against Trump, this public support.
Those could definitely play a role. Their legal team has experience challenging this administration, and the widespread support might influence the political or even judicial climate around the case. It's complex.
So wrapping this up, it really comes down to this core tension, doesn't it? Government trying to use funding to steer university policy versus a university defending its autonomy and academic freedom.
That's the heart of it, a fundamental disagreement about the role of government and the independence of higher education.
And as we've discussed, the ripples go way beyond Harvard Yard. This impacts research, education nationally, maybe even globally, and these core principles of free inquiry.
Absolutely. The outcome could set precedents for decades about how government funding interacts with academic life.
President Garber's quote about universities needing to fulfill their role without improper government intrusion really seems to capture Harvard's stance.
It sums up their argument perfectly. We can be accountable, we can follow the law, but we must remain free from undue political control to do our essential work.
It leaves you thinking, doesn't it, about that line between accountability for public funds and the autonomy needed for discovery and free thought. Where is that line? And maybe more importantly, what happens to society to progress if one side wins too decisively here? This feels like, well, a really defining moment for how we value higher education moving forward.